Now, police have conducted weekend raids here in Berlin as they hunt for two of Germany's most wanted terrorist suspects. The men are accused of being active in the Red Army faction. That's a militant left-wing group that carried out a series of murders, kidnappings, bombings and robberies from the 1970s to the 1990s. Another suspected fugitive was arrested last month in Berlin. Daniela Klette had been hiding in plain sight under a fake identity, tutoring school children and teaching capoeira classes in the neighbourhood where she lived. Well, here's what authorities had to say shortly after her arrest.
Daniela
Klette was arrested yesterday in Berlin. She and two other Red Army faction terrorists have been under investigation for years for attempted murder and various robberies. All three suspects belong to the third generation of the Red Army faction and have been on the run since the 1990s. They've been associated with numerous serious offences, some of which date back 25 years.
Well, Michael Colborne from the investigative journalism website Bellingcat actually traced Daniela Klette to Berlin last year, months before she was arrested. Welcome to DW. Why was she on your radar?
Well, she was on my radar because some German journalists had actually reached out to me, reached out to Bellingcat and then to me, wondering if there was anything that we could do, wondering if there were any digital investigative techniques that we could use to maybe look at some of the older photos of these three individuals who were allegedly part of the RAF. I really wasn't expecting to find anything. I wasn't expecting, when especially searching for pictures of faces that are the photos themselves that were 20 years old, if not more, I wasn't expecting anything more. At most, maybe an interesting bit of information here or there about what one of them might have been involved with. I thought it would really kind of end up almost like a brief exercise or a training like we do at Bellingcat on how some of these digital investigative techniques work. But obviously, as the events over the last week showed, my expectations were they were exceeded.
Right. So just tell us briefly what you did then. So you took these 20-year-old photos and did what?
What I did was I used a publicly available facial recognition tool. It's a website that's publicly available. And what I did was I used this tool to search for photos online of what the algorithm, for lack of a better word, what the algorithm thinks is are faces and photos that match the person in the photo that you're searching for. So, in other words, if you put my face into this tool, you're going to find many pictures of me covering various events at journalistic conferences, hiding in the background with my camera in places like that. And usually, when you use this tool, if you choose to use this kind of tool, you don't get results quite like what I got.
Right.
With the situation with Daniela Klette, what I did was I searched very briefly using these old photos, and I wasn't expecting any significant result. But what I did find were several photos of a woman the algorithm thought was likely the same person, photos that were of a woman at a capoeira center in Berlin associated with like a German-Brazilian friendship foundation. So what I did when I found those images, and I kind of looked closely at the faces and I thought, okay, these could possibly be the same person. What I then did was I used another publicly available tool, and I have to stress that they're publicly available part of this. I used that tool to compare the two faces, so the older photos of Klette and then the newer photos that might be Klette. And in every instance, comparing them, the program said, this is very likely the same person. So
Okay.
I thought, this is not what I was expecting.
But the German authorities have been looking for this woman for 30 years. So had they not been doing this?
I'm not sure if they had been using these kinds of tools because, to be honest, I'm not entirely sure that German authorities are legally allowed to use some of these tools, even though they're publicly available. And I suspect there are going to be more of these kinds of tools made publicly available because of Germany's, very strict privacy laws. I suspect that they were not in a position to use these tools, but ironically, anybody in the public eye was. Now, I use these tools and with the German journalists from ARD to try to find more. They then followed the lead that I found, and we basically published our findings, for lack of a better word, on a German language podcast in December, where this information was revealed. But we now know from German law enforcement that they said they got a tip about Klette back in November. Now, that certainly didn't come from me. I've had no communication with law enforcement, nor have the other journalists involved in this.
Well, just on that, why didn't you have involvement with law enforcement? So you found one of Germany's most wanted fugitives, and it sounds like you didn't pass your findings on to the police.
In principle, I don't do any sort of communication or anything like that with law enforcement. It's not my job. I see myself as a journalist and researcher. That's in the principle of where it comes from. But there's actually a more mundane reason why I wouldn't have even thought of it. Is I assumed if I found it, surely some law enforcement authority in the European Union's largest country was already aware of it. I assumed that I found something that was, maybe a bit interesting, especially for journalists, especially for people interested in these kinds of research tools.
Right.
But I never thought for a second that I found some sort of, that I never thought that I found her per se.
Okay, fascinating. Thank you so much for joining us and talking us through that. Michael Colborne from Bellingcat.
Thank you.